We acknowledge traditional owners, elders and ancestral spirits of the First Nations peoples of Australia. Guided by their strength, tenacity and wisdom, we move forward with reverence, seeking to realise our ways of doing to know, and knowing to be connected with country and community. Out of recognition that its campuses occupy their traditional lands, Western Sydney University acknowledges the Darug, Dharawal, Gundungurra and Wiradjuri peoples and thank them for their support of its work on their lands. The land upon which we learn is, and always will be, the land of Australian First Nations custodians of country, the sovereign rights holders of Australia. I'm Madison Shakespeare, presenting today, a proud East Coast saltwater woman. I'm here yarning with you about research project number 4, Foundations for Belonging, Refugee Understanding of Indigenous Lands and Contemporary Issues. And I'm humbled to be in the presence of Bhavya and Michelle. In a proactive approach that seeks to strategically protect the intellectual cultural property rights of a First Nations person. You'll note that there are some terms of agreement to view this presentation. This is a proactive approach to ensure that iconology, images, concepts, thematic concerns that arise throughout this presentation can be presented to you in an environment where the presenter, myself, feels that there is an agreement with viewers. This creates a culturally safe environment in which to move forward in our yarning. It also harnesses a decolonising approach that strategically seeks to protect First Nations knowledges and practices. In the spirit of reconciliation, I ask that you very quickly peruse these terms and we move forward and yarn together. This valuable research opportunity would not have arisen if it had not been for the research partners that you see listed on this screen. Western Sydney University, specifically the Institute for Culture and Society, and the Young and Resilient Research Centre. Settlement Services International, or SSI, and UNSW. This project built upon prior collaborations between Western Sydney University with the partner organisation Settlement Services International, or SSI, and earlier research included Foundations for Belonging 2020, a snapshot of newly arrived refugees, Foundations for Belonging 2021, insights on newly arrived refugees, women and digital inclusion, and Foundations for Belonging 2022, insights on newly arrived refugees, family separation and reunion during the pandemic. We specifically looked at Foundations for Belonging, Refugee Understanding of Indigenous Lands and Contemporary Issues to gauge newly arrived and settled refugees' attitudinal perceptions of settlement in Australia in contexts of Indigenous Australia, to understand refugee interest in and knowledge of Australia's Indigenous histories, to consider refugee understanding of current issues in reconciliation, to gain refugee perspectives on how SSI can facilitate deeper understanding about First Nations Australia, and to connect refugees with Indigenous lands and custodians through a range of qualitative and participatory research methods. This project was the first First Nation-led research collaboration that occurred between Western Sydney University and SSI. Let's look at the First Nations research paradigm around which this research was structured. There are 3 stages in this research, and the first stage involved taking refugee participants out on country. And indeed, First Nations-led research, I conducted all of these yarnings on country. And we also involved a digital emotion mapping app called Mapimo Yarn Country. Strategically, this app provides users with opportunities to reflect on their interactions with country. And this proved to be a fabulous factor of covalence, so to speak, that bridged and brought together stage 1 with stage 2 of our research project. In stage 2, yarning focus groups specifically looking at research participants' outcomes, experiences, reflections on their involvement with Mapimo Yarn Country on-country workshops, as well as their involvement with the app. And indeed, stage 2 was completely First Nation led as well. I ran all of the focus groups that were online. Stage 3 is data assessment and reporting stage. And so data that's retrieved from Mapimo Yarn Country app is analysed, as well as yarning focus group transcripts that were considered in vivo, coded in vivo. But really importantly, another factor of covalence, so to speak, in terms of moving towards stage 3, evidencing outcomes, was the involvement of another First Nations person who has made 2 audiovisual clips as well as a portfolio of photos evidencing outcomes from stage 1. So realising outcomes through our ways of knowing through doing and being. This also gave refugee participants a fantastic opportunity to interact with another First Nations person as part of stage 1 research participation. So stage 1 and stage 2 were very specifically First Nation led. In fact, I led both of those stages. But importantly, cultural interface methodologies indeed bolstered and were the foundation across all stages. And there was much collaboration, deep, meaningful collaboration with my ally research colleagues. Significantly, in stage 3 research, it still continued to be First Nation led in many respects because I still had jurisdiction, so to speak, over cultural matters and situations where cultural interpretation may be required, particularly in regard to coding of transcripts and interpreting and construing data that was posted by research participants in Mapimo Yarn Country app. I wanted to impart some sort of sense of scope and the scale of this research project, so I thought we'd briefly look at workshop locations and what was involved in stage 1. Stage 1, the on-country yarning opportunities, it gave research participants an opportunity to be on country with me and yarn about natural elements that we came across. And I ran these workshops across a number of different and very diverse locations. The first was in Queensland at Logan, Kingston. We're right on the border and we started in Logan and ended up in Kingston. The second was in Armidale, New South Wales, and that was specifically with Yazidi community members. The third was in Bankstown, and that was convened for refugee peoples who spoke Arabic as their primary language. And the second workshop in Bankstown was for refugee peoples, many of whom spoke dialects of Assyrian. And the last workshop was by the Yarra, or I probably should say traditionally the Yora Yora, and that was in the centre of Melbourne. And predominantly refugee peoples at that workshop had very recently arrived from the Ukraine. So we have 5 researcher-led workshops on country across no more than 5 weeks. And attending these workshops was wonderful actually, but it could have been quite challenging. Very fortunate that ancestors were on our side. And indeed, I travelled the distance by car and van. So it was quite a long stretch of travel involved across the 5 weeks. Where possible, I contacted and liaised with traditional owners and elders if possible, so that we could yarn with them about coming onto their country and yarn about what we were doing, and in fact invited them to the events in terms of the on-country workshops. At each workshop, our First Nations videographer, photographer was present, recording all the doing that was occurring. So I'm going to speak about doing, knowing and being, and specifically Indigenous epistemologies, ways of knowing and understanding. And this is what these workshops focused on, connecting to country through interacting with our natural environment, our shared natural environment. There are enormous logistics involved in convening these workshops. So 3 of the 5 workshops were run with bilingual guides who are the most wonderful, invaluable colleagues, mentors, inspirational friends, I can call them, who immediately, so contemporaneously, translated, explained the delivery that I was presenting in English. And so you can see on this slide at Armidale, and then both of the workshops in Bankstown, and then the workshop in Melbourne, we actually had BGs, bilingual guides. Strategically and in hindsight very valuably, I made a very short, it was about 9 minutes in length, audio-visual clip where I introduced myself. And this is really important culturally, traditionally speaking, that people that we're going to yarn with, we're going to spend time on country with, we're going to get to know, understand us and our background. And it was really, as I said, it was really valuable because it developed rapport with BGs in a way that I hadn't actually anticipated. They recounted this later, and it sort of gave me an introduction so that when the BGs came to the workshops, yes, they knew what was involved in the research processes, but they also felt a real sense of familiarity and they felt welcomed. Because in the yarning introductory video that I put together for them, I explained how critical language is, and it was certainly a traditional, Indigenous traditional approach that was very much based on valuing all people who were coming to the workshops. It's really important to realise also that many of the BGs were the same community members as the refugee participants who came along. So creating culturally safe contexts of yarning, even through an introductory video, was a fantastic way for all to understand how valuable we considered their involvement was, not in terms of just purely the data outcomes, more specifically in terms of realising the contexts and the experiences and the histories of all peoples who were coming along. And that certainly, I think, was a factor that deeply engaged most who were involved in the workshops. So how did we harness Indigenous ways of knowing, doing and being in this research? Well, you've heard me briefly yarn about Mapimo. Mapimo Yarn Country is more than a map. It's about doing on country and reflecting on being on country and how being at a particular place on country makes us feel. It's about knowing on country through our connectedness with our natural environment. Using First Nation co-design software is really strategic as a decolonising method through which to obtain data. We used this app in every one of the First Nation led on country workshops. Specifically, this app is a digital emotion mapping space designed around knowing, doing and being, through which to yarn about personal connections on and off our shared environment. Remembering that this research project was looking at foundations of belonging, always considering contexts in which refugee peoples realise belonging. So, understanding interconnectedness with our shared environment was certainly a focus that was fundamental in this research project. This app also provided for the opportunity to seamlessly connect stages 1 and 2 together, so the on-country workshops with the yarning focus groups. And this app provided data for assessment at stage 3 on refugee participant reflections on how connections with the natural environment, as we call it country, affected their emotional well-being. So, understanding how you feel through your interconnectedness gives you an opportunity to reflect on your being and potentially your well-being. Well, how does Mapimo position users in contexts of knowing, doing and being? Mapimo is a digital doing space in which people select emotions that reflect their state of being. So by facilitating users recording how they feel about place and why they feel this way, users are able to reflect on their emotional interactions with place and consider how place may affect their mood. Uniquely, offering users the opportunity to reflect on possible nexus between elements in the natural environment and how they feel, positions them within a digital space that focuses on their relationship with the natural environment around them. This evokes moments where users can experience how contextually being on country correlates with how they feel and know. Mapimo is a digital knowing space that privileges Indigenous ways through which to know. And by prioritising app users' feelings as the key mode of communication, Mapimo is a digital yarning space focused on knowing well-being. As you can see by the screenshot on the left-hand side, a little snippet here gives you an example at Little Bay, where one user has selected 3 emotions, and you can select between 1 to 3 emotions to indicate how you feel. This user has said that they feel content, empowered and happy. What I've also done is I've included an extended view of this particular post, because there's also a feature where other users can also add reports about the same area. And so within the same space, so to speak, we have 3 different reports. We have one user who's happy, empowered and content, another who's excited, happy and proud, another who's empowered, overwhelmed and content. And despite the fact that all 3 users are feeling different things, they still sit within this digital being space. And it's a space where all in this context are welcome. You'll note also that there's the possibility to upload photographs. So there's not an emphasis on extensive English written skills, literacy skills in this app. Rather, visual narratives can be evoked through photographs that show why perhaps a person has a particular connection with this place. And when I said all are welcome, we were very specific in designing terms and conditions that ensured that this digital knowing space could achieve cultural safety, so it would be and is a culturally safe context in which to post. What that means is that designers, 3 designers, have access to all of the posts and indeed can ensure that if for some reason somebody posts a comment that perhaps could be construed in a defamatory way, in a discriminatory way, in a way that perhaps infers racism, then there's the ability to immediately remove that post. More specifically also, however, if photographs are posted and very innocently taken and posted by people who don't realise that perhaps there is something in a photograph that is a cultural breach, then we can go in and we can remove that post. So, for instance, somebody may find they feel in a particular way at a particular place, they take a photograph, but it turns out to be a sacred place on women's country or a sacred place on men's country. A place that shouldn't have a photograph taken of it, and certainly not uploaded to an app and shown to the world at large. So introducing this additional scope, this cultural safety scope, was intentional in terms of devising culturally safe yarning spaces in which all could be. I'd like to now skip forward to stage 3, which is still ongoing research at the time of recording this in April 2023. So there are at least 4 outcomes that we're seeking to achieve at this stage, and one of which is to draw conclusions from transcripts that arose through the yarning focus groups. So research participants who were involved in the on-country yarning workshops, then approximately 4 weeks later, after having used the Mapimo Yarn Country app for 4 weeks, then attended an online Zoom yarning focus group. We're near completion in terms of assessing data from the Yarn Country app, and the 2 audio-visual clips and portfolio photos that are being created by the First Nation creative videographer, photographer, they're near completion. And we have just commenced work on the research report, which is an intensive research report for SSI. But because this research project is ongoing, I will not report at this stage on final research outcomes. I wanted to give you an at-glance view of some of the capabilities of Mapimo Yarn Country as a research data collecting tool, so to speak. Looking at some statistics here, and I haven't given you the exact figures in terms of quantum, I've only given you percentage breakdowns because this project is not yet completed. But looking at Armidale, it's encouraging to see that 30% were excited and 23% were happy, 13% were proud. And you can read the rest of the percentages for yourself. But certainly looking at this research participant group, it's really positive to see that we didn't have any who were angry, who were depressed, who were frustrated. Although one has to be careful because there are times when positive posts will be entered that reflect that people are frustrated and they are angry because there's been some form of degradation or negative detriment occur within a natural environment around them. So it's really important to ensure that if there are other components in the post, so photographs for instance, or annotations made by the app user, that there is a contextual reading of emotions. I wanted to give you a couple of comments from the research itself as well, and I haven't been specific here because the project is not yet finished. But I will note that every comment, other than one which is contained in here about rent, has been really positive. A beautiful place and country for all to belong. A peaceful place for all. The leaves of this tree can be used to keep rain off you. A very young baby magpie, a very special wise bird. This place made me thinking about the life and connection between all of us. Lovely small Aboriginal island with gallery where you travel for 5 to 8 minutes by free ferry from nearby. And it goes on. Certainly if you read these posts, you can see that there is meaningful engagement from refugee participants who are actually making these posts. Some observations that can be made at this point in this research project. This decolonising methodology evoked opportunities for meaningful cultural exchange between researchers and refugee participants that evolved through different types of Indigenous-led yarning across all stages of this research project. Designing the research paradigm around Indigenous research methods and methodologies created opportunities for refugee peoples to encounter and develop informed perspectives on First Nations knowledges and practices in Australia, refugee participants' new homeland. Mapimo Young Country provided a confidential way in which all could participate in yarning about our shared natural environment. This meant that participants could continue to connect with aspects of their new country after the Yarn Country workshops. If users abstained from creating a post in this app but explored other posts, then they became part of a communal knowing space that evolves as others indicate how natural elements impact on their being. Valuably, this assembles diverse experiences within one communication space created through shared experiences on and of country. As Mapimo Yarn Country offered users opportunities to understand how others find well-being through connection to natural environment and elements, it revealed new places on country that users can explore and where they may also feel a sense of belonging. Despite diverse nexus of experiences that Australian First Nations and refugee people share, there is a scarcity of literature on how strengths-based approaches focused on and of country can build beneficial cultural relationships through mutual understanding. Directing research through Mapimo Yarn Country, an Indigenous designed space of knowing through connecting with country, facilitates digital yarning in which all are valued through how they feel. This not only evidences the value of developing research protocols that privilege Indigenous methodologies, but it strongly advocates for future funding aimed at Indigenous-led software design, through which to evolve communication spaces in which all may feel care, acceptance, and belonging.